This is Joe Kennedy interviewing Bob Hinchliffe, his service to our country. So, Bob, let's just start way back early on. You were a student at Boston University.
Correct.
In your late teens. And so what was life like at that time at BU?
Can I give you this?
Yeah.
Just an idea.
Absolutely.
I'll start up here and you down.
Great.
But we all think of Pearl Harbor as the start of the war, World War II. And I can visualize coming home from church and after the 12 o'clock Mass on that Sunday, as we were walking past the dormitories at Boston University, they're shouting out the window about this Pearl Harbor. No idea what it was. We found out soon enough. And at that point, we were really knowing that we would be into the war effort ourselves, and so we had to prepare for it. Well, I was a sophomore at that time. I had joined the ROTC because the offer they were giving us was that if we continued ROTC through 4 years, when we got our degree from the school, we'd also get a commission in the Reserve Officer Corps, infantry. So I said, that sounds good to me, because when I was a freshman, we were not at war, but it was pending over there. So I said, I'm going to stay with the ROTC, and then Pearl Harbor came along, and we're in the throes of it. So at school, there were 29 of us in the class of 1944 who applied for the advanced corps. All 29 of us were there expecting to graduate and to get our degrees as well as a commission on the day of graduation. But as it turns out, the Army changed its mind. In the summer of 1944, they knew they would be invading Europe, and they needed infantry officers. So across the country, they called to active duty, we in the infantry, to come in. We were commissioned, and we became regular Army officers at that time.
And how old were you then?
I was born in 1922, so that would have been 19. I was 19 years old when I went in, and led these other 19-year-old boys, 20-year-old, and all the way through from basic training, really. We were commissioned and sent to the 78th Infantry Division, which was an infantry division, down at Camp Pickett, Virginia. And from there, after 6 months of training, we shipped out of New York, across to England, and we landed at Plymouth, England. Within the month, we crossed the channel to the beaches of Normandy, and we landed there, and we were in battle with about 6 months of training, but we were ready to go. And so I fought from the beaches of Normandy across the northern through Belgium, all the way into Germany, the Siegfried Line, and the Hürtgen Forest. And a strange thing, because people don't think of it, but the clothes that I put on in England to get aboard the boat to go across the channel, I was still wearing at Thanksgiving. And this was from about September to November. The same clothes that I put on in England, I was wearing in November.
Because you didn't have a change of clothes?
We didn't have a time. We didn't have a place to go. We didn't have a change of clothes, really. So, but when you're in combat, it's 24 hours a day. We had no weekend. I never got to Paris during the entire war. I made up for it afterwards when I was in Berlin and such. I got down to the Nuremberg trials. But actually, as a fighting infantry division, we were fighting all the time, and it was just every week we were advancing to the next little community, and one after the other. And then it was in the week before Christmas, on December 18th, when we had the first attack of the Battle of the Bulge. It became known as the Battle of the Bulge afterward, because that's the appearance of what the front line looked like when the German attacked and made the big bulge in the line. So December 18th, which was a Saturday, we had a heavy artillery artillery that morning. I couldn't understand why, because we were pushing the German back all the time. We didn't think they had any ammunition left. And we were part of the guilty party because I was not sending out patrols because they're just, the Germans are going back. We don't need patrols. And that's exactly what happened, because we were not sending out patrols to find out what the Germans were doing. They caught us by surprise. And that's why the whole Battle of the Bulge turned out to be a surprise battle, but fortunately with the 82nd Airborne Division as our reserve, they held up at, guys, the name of the town. My problem I have it with, but what were the paratroopers in the Battle of the...
Bastogne?
Bastogne, right. I live by that lady over there. She has the amazing...
Who is that lady?
That's my daughter, my proud daughter, yes. So the Battle of the Bulge came just at Christmas time, and that's when Patton came up from the south and we came down from the north, and the Battle of the Bulge resolved about a week after Christmas, and then we started moving forward again.
And what do you remember life was like then? I mean, the transition from being a college sophomore to months later fighting across Europe in the Battle of the Bulge.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, to me, I went into classrooms with the ROTC where they were talking World War I battles and what we were doing, and I couldn't believe that. And Beth points out in one of the articles that in the spring I was at the school, sailboat racing, things like that, and in the fall I was leading my young men across the battlefields of France and Germany. And the, I think it was another memory, but there was a, what's the name of the city?
Remagen?
Remagen. Remagen was a little town. We were coming across the Rhineland, and we were told there were no bridges across the Rhine River. Everything had been bombed out. Well, lo and behold, the 4th Armored, which was traveling on our left, came up to the town of Remagen, and there was a bridge across the Rhine River. So they needed an infantry division, so they sent word back that there was a bridge here, and that if they could get an infantry division there, the bridge would be. We went up, and I was the first one to get up to the bridge. And
What do you remember from the bridge?
I remember that it was standing, because up to that, the moments beforehand, we were told there was not a bridge on the Rhine River across, and this had to be a railroad bridge, and so the Germans were using it to bring their casualties back from France across this bridge, and that's why they hadn't, I guess they had planned on bombing it, but we got there so quickly on that day that they couldn't bomb it. So we went down, and I got across the bridge about 2 o'clock in the morning, black as could be, and on the far side, up in the hillside, the Germans had the machine gun coming down on it, so our only recourse was to run across the bridge and make sure we could make it, and we did, fortunately. So that was at the little town of Remagen, and that was the first time the Germans said that an invader had been able to cross the Rhine River and get into Germany over the Rhine River.
You're kidding.
Yeah, that was the, bring back memories. It was about the third day of March, as I picture it. The bridge was a railroad bridge, double track, with walking passages on the outer of both sides, and it was there. It lasted for about 2 weeks. That's right, because when we went across, they were trying to, matter of fact, they had a jet fighter plane. A jet fighter plane was being used to bomb that bridge. First time I ever saw a jet in combat. And the jets were experimental, high speed. They could no more get close to that bridge dropping bomb because they're going so fast. So it was a waste of time, but at least I saw my first jet over at the Remagen Bridge there. And then we got across the bridge, and then we headed up to the Ruhr Valley at that point because Germany was really collapsing, and when we got across the bridge, we could head up that way.
And what was life like? Just what was your day like? What do you remember about the actual, as you're advancing in your life with your men, and you had siblings that were also in the war at this point, right?
Exactly, they were, the war that we were in was something distinct and different. I had no common experience back in civilian life that would be matching what I was experiencing firsthand in the battle. Because the German, of course, were well prepared to attack, and they did attack. And we had a bunch of our college boys who were against them. And the equipment that we had was the best equipment. We had plenty of ammunition. We started anti-tank. We had a 37 millimeter was the gun, but before we got into combat, that had been expanded to a 57 inch, and then we had a 76 millimeter gun, which actually was what we needed for the German Tiger tanks, because they were effective. And so the 76 millimeter gun was much appreciated, and it'd be hard to describe what life was like, because the life I was leading at that moment was a wartime Army life. We had no bunk at night. Where we dug the foxhole, we lived in the day, we had our meals brought up to us, and we moved on forward from there. But we had no barracks to go into, and that didn't come about until after the war ended. And at that time, we were in the little town of Wuppertal.
How long did you live in those foxholes?
Well, we landed in mid-September on the beaches, and we were in the foxholes until we went across the Rhine River at Remagen. So that was like almost 6 months, 8 months. That's right. And when we said we lived in the foxhole, that's exactly it. There were no houses available for us as we moved forward. Everything was destroyed, artillery killed, and it was really desperate, put it that way. And I was just thankful when we got through to Berlin and knew that we thought the war was over for us at that time, and we could just relax. But lo and behold, there was still a war going on in the Pacific. And so when we wrapped up and they had peace supposedly in Germany, we got orders that we're shipping out of Marseille, France, on August 28th. August 28th happened to be my sister's birthday, so I remember August 28th we were to ship out of Marseille through the Panama Canal to get to the Philippines.
So, what happened before you ended up leaving Europe? You pointed out before we started this interview that your uniform is still, that you still wear, that you can fit into from 70-something years ago, is still hanging.
Exactly, right.
And there's a bronze star hanging on that uniform.
There is, that's correct.
And so can you describe for me what happened when you were in the bronze star?
Well, it's amazing. That was in the Hurtgen Forest. We had an attack. Matter of fact, there was a stream that was going across between Lammersdorf and Strauch, and we had to go through it. When I reconnoitered the night before, there was ice on it. That was fine. But lo and behold, the next morning when we got down there, with the number of feet going across it, the ice broke through and the men were walking in water. So as soon as they got up the other side, we all had been told to watch out for trench foot. You have to dry. So the idea that everybody had, we had 2 pairs of socks, one on and one in your belt. Every day you changed it. But the men were forewarned or told they had to dry their feet. Don't take anything for granted, dry your feet. Well, like everybody else, there's some people who were above that. And lo and behold, they sat with their feet wet for 48 hours, and next thing you know, they took off their shoes, the feet, well, they couldn't walk, they couldn't do anything, and they were in foxholes with the German artillery coming in. So I set up a patrol of about 6, 7 of my men, and we went out to the foxhole, and there must have been almost 20 of these people. Yeah, I'm amazed, even at this late date again. But we had to lift them out of the foxhole, take them down to the aid station, and come back and get more and more. And it was in the last, well, it turned out to be the last group, the German artillery came in. Oh, and I lost 3 of my men just like that. And they were volunteers too, because they knew the people who were in the foxhole, so they wanted to come out and help. But we thought that everything was quiet. The area was not under artillery at the time, so we just thought we could go out at the early hours after midnight and individually take these men out of the foxhole, take them down to the aid station where they could then be sent back in the jeep. And at that time, there were, I lost 3 men, and there must have been about a dozen that I had recruited to go out there. So I decided that I was going to have to write a letter to the mother. So I wanted to get a Bronze Star for all of those 7 men. And I wrote the name, sent it in, and when it came to the colonel, he said, "Bob, you were there too." Yeah, but what I was doing, I said, it was just my officer's responsibility. So I'm putting your name on the list too. So it went through, and we got notice, we were still in the Battle of the Bulge at the time, we got notice that you have been awarded the Bronze Star, but you will get it when you're discharged. And that was it. That's exactly what happened. So,
Thank you for sharing this.
I didn't, God, isn't that amazing? It's more than 70 years ago. I can just imagine those 3 young fellows. But that was the life of the infantry. You had no, and when we went into battle, incidentally, from the day we went into battle, there was no weekend passes, no overnight. You slept where you fought, you ate where you fought, and you moved forward. Fortunately, the Germans did not have as much defensive equipment as they could have had, and so we had a little better opportunity to move forward and constantly push them until the Battle of the Bulge when they reacted. But then after that, it was all over. So
What was the Battle of the Bulge like?
the Battle of the Bulge was a total surprise because the German troops had been falling back. They didn't have the men to defend against us, and they were just constantly falling back. And so when that morning, I mentioned the artillery that came in. When the artillery came in, it came in the volume that usually preceded an invasion, a capture. And my company, didn't think that the German had any equipment to do that, but Saturday morning it came in, and it turned out that that was the start of the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler and the Germans had just, unbeknownst to any of us, and I was not sending my reconnaissance people into the backyards to find it, so I was guilty of it, that I did not understand that the Germans actually were developing troops in that area, and they were getting ready for that Christmas time. And so it was a week before Christmas, on the 18th of December 1944, that they dropped artillery on us, to the point that we wondered what was going on, truly, because we didn't think they had the equipment to carry out an attack. But anyway, they did, and we moved forward, and once the Germans were driven back in the Battle of the Bulge, they had lost all of their equipment, all of their people, and the war was over as far as we were concerned.
Did you ever speak to your siblings when you were all at war?
Say that again?
Did you ever speak to your siblings when you were all in service?
No. My only contact, today they have these radios they call home at night after they've flown a mission or something. in our days, our only contact with the people was, we had these little V letters. I don't know what these will be for your time, V-mail, that you could write, and they'd take a picture of it and then send the negative to New York, and they'd print it out there, and it was a nice little short letter. But no, I talked to my mother and father from Berlin, so that would have been after the war was over, and we went into Berlin. Oh. It was after 4th of July. So, but anyway, that was the first contact I had with my mother and father. They were living in Connecticut, New Britain, Connecticut. And I got on the phone, and you could make a reservation the day beforehand. And so like 6:30 at night, Berlin time, they would notify my family at home that I would be calling at 6:30 our time there, which was 6 hours ahead of time, so like noontime, I would call. And it was always a surprise to get the mother or father on the phone. Both my brothers were fighting the war.
Where were they?
My older brother was anti-aircraft, and he was in Guadalcanal. My younger brother was a pilot with the Air Corps, and he was flying gasoline from India to China. And the big B-29s would go to China, load up with his gasoline, and fly up to Tokyo. So my brother Joe was just flying from India to China. My brother Tommy was on Guadalcanal anti-aircraft. I had a sister who was with the Navy too. She was in Washington in the Navy intelligence down there. And my younger sister was just a baby, so she was not old enough to get into the war, but all are dead now. I don't know what I'm doing hanging on here. My father lived to be in his 80s, and that's the closest he came to. Here I am breaking new ground into 94.
You're doing pretty good.
I do, it's clear. I mean, when people say, what am I doing? I don't know, just living, trying to enjoy it best I can. Yeah. And there were 29 of us in the ROTC that all went in together. 2 of them were killed during the war, and the other 27 came back. We went back to school. We graduated with the class of 47, and then disappeared. I headed up the group that kept on going, and I'm the only one left.
Did you come back with the GI Bill? Did you use GI Bill?
I did. Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but the home I built with the GI funds that they gave us, 4% mortgage interest, which was very appealing at the time. And I went to school. I went through. I am a CPA, so I went through a regular Boston University and graduate school there. And
how did you meet your wife? First wife?
My first assignment was Portland, Maine.
Mm-hmm. As a CPA?
I joined the Bell System Telephone Company, and there was only one fellow I knew from Portland, Maine, and he was at school at BU. And when I went up to Maine, he was nice enough to invite me over to his house with his mother and father and had dinner. And he said, "Bob, I'm going down to Higgins Beach this afternoon. I'm going down with Jerry McLaughlin and his sister." Uh-oh, those were the fateful words. It really was, because I knew nobody else in Maine, and it just turned out that I was, as I mentioned, the CPA, I was studying 2 nights a week.
You married the first girl you met in Maine.
Pardon?
You married the first girl you met in Maine.
Pretty close, but she never forgave me, because it was at the beach in the summer that I met, but I was so involved in my CPA study 2 nights a week there and everything. So the CPA exam was in November. And that was when I came back into civilization. And so on New Year's Eve, my friend from school came back, and we all went out together, and Dorothy was with the group then, and she said, "Yeah, he met me in July, and he had a second date on New Year's Eve." So So I wasn't making any points by that, but I did get my CPA. I passed the entire thing at one time, and so I'm registered both in Maine and Massachusetts.
And did you keep in touch? You said 27 of the 29 survived the war, the folks that you went in with. Did you keep in touch with any of them when you got back?
Everyone. I was the man who was the contact with every one of those. And it just happened to be the BU in May. Was it be May? Well, some years later, it was May, they had a war guys get together. And I went back and I ran into 3 or 4 of the others who were there. And we were all saying, well, I wonder what happened to Pete LaMotta, who was a football player, played for Chicago Bears. Things like that. And they said, well, I don't know, but I left. It was in May. And so I said, this summer I'm going to study and find out where they are. And I made a contact with 4 had died, and the rest I set up a reservation down at Cape Cod at the East Bay Lodge. I don't know whether it's still around there or not, but East Bay Lodge, and there were 23 who had, are still living, came back, and we had 19 of the 23 which came with their family. And every year there, until about 2 years ago, Beth? Because about 2 years ago we had the last one, and then George Sawicki, Needham, died, and I'm the only one here.
Are you really?
Yeah, and you say, why? I mean, well, I just stumbled along, and I guess try to keep out of the way of automobiles or something like that. But
We're not through with it yet. We still got more to do. The so you came back. When did you move to Wellesley?
we were married in '49 up in Maine, and we moved here 2 years later. We moved up on Shadow Lane. 2 years later, then I transferred down to New York with the AT&T. We moved down to Greenwich, and then we came back from Greenwich into this house. Beth, I remember you were about
56.
56, starting school.
So you've been in this house for 60 years.
Yeah, roughly that. It's was an interlude here. Dorothy died in '89, and so just Beth and myself here in the house. And my closest friend, not an ROTC, at Boston University, was a Bill
McMahon.
Bill died, and his widow became available. So in what year was it, Beth? I know.
97.
97. So Jean and I were married. She had her home in Needham on Northgate, and so I moved in there. Beth took over this house, and for the next 15 years, everything went fine. And then poor Jean developed Alzheimer's. So she went into an Alzheimer unit over in Arlington Heights, and that was 3 or 4 years ago now. Just absolutely, you can't believe how a person can lose all contact with reality. Well, I'm sure everybody has had somebody who went through it. So that was the thing. So about 3, 4 years ago, you lose track of it, but poor Jean was so far gone that she is still in the nursing home with private attendants and such. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm here pretty much with Beth and spend my time here. But that's a story of a life.
It is.
But,
it's quite a story.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it, really. I can't say I enjoyed the life of a infantry officer because we had no reserve. It's like having a football team that shows up with nobody on the bench. I mean, everybody's out there fighting. And so that's what our infantry was like in World War II. Because we could fight, we'd fight and fight. And there was one period when we were over in Germany, won the Battle of the Bulge, because the front line went from the North Sea all the way down to Switzerland. That's about 300 or 400 miles. It's the same as between Portland, Maine and one of the cities down in South Carolina. And that was our battle line. We had men every yard from what was down to here. And we had no reserve. That's why when the Battle of the Bulge began, the only reserve that Eisenhower had was the paratroopers, who we just finished up Market Garden, was up in Queens, or not Queens, but I forget the name of it there. And so they came in and they were able to hold the one point where the Germans were making progress, and that was the name Bethley town, began with a B.
Bastogne?
Bastogne, right. The paratroopers came in and grabbed Bastogne and prevented the Germans from coming in, and once the Germans could not get into Bastogne, their road network was lost. And so that's where the Battle of the Bulge ended. And from that point on, we just moved across to the Rhine River and into Berlin. I've been doing an awful lot of talking here.
It's the whole point.
Yeah,
You're doing
I gather
good.
so.
You're doing good.
I haven't had the opportunity to, because so many of, us, me, back in 1990, 50 years after D-Day, which would be 94, back in 94, Hollywood started to put together a couple of movies, and with that, people started to get a favorable impression of World War II. And so people were asking questions, how did this go, or how did that? And so suddenly you had the movie, and now suddenly World War II became the good war. And just from a nothing, it suddenly came in that regard, and that was when everybody wanted to hear something about World War II. And I spoke at schools around here, and fascinating, and whether I spoke to second, third, fourth grade, or 9th, 10th, 12th grade, the first question I always got from the audience out there, I don't ask me why, maybe they played so many games, but did you kill anybody? And these were the youngsters, I guess, because the game, they figured soldiers killed others, so they wanted to know, did I kill anybody? And the next question was, how many? Well, so we just passed it along at the time and just realized that there still are questions that don't really get answered easily. And so, but other than that, I think I'm on pretty solid ground.
I think you're doing great.
Yeah. Well,
What the point of this
yeah.
this project, Bob, is given the extraordinary service that you and your members of your generation and your fellow men and women in service have given to our country, the lessons that you've learned, the lives that you've led, and what you've seen, to try to catalog those lessons and store them in the Library of Congress for future generations and researchers to be able to tell stories and to weave together these narratives from an entire generation that saved our nation. You have any advice for us, for them?
The world is so changed, there will never be another World War II. There will never be the ability to get that many people in one place as a battlefield. I mean, they drop an atomic bomb and that's all gone, so they wouldn't put that many people as a target any place. So I think we're going to find more. It's like these people down in wherever it is, Afghanistan and such, who just individually become troublemakers, and you worry what's going to happen. But I don't think Russia would ever venture to a point of wanting to get involved in a war. And I'm sure that France, England, the only country that could have built the atomic bomb was the United States. Nobody else had. And I don't know how Russia has done it. I've been amazed to think that Russia was keeping pace with us on the atomic bomb. And yet, when I hear about what the Americans had to do as scientists to get over this hump or that, how the Russians did it, I don't know. But I don't think there'll ever be another war like World War II with all those people involved. Now it's going to be these little independent battles that
Let's hope so.
are troublesome, yes.